A primary goal of this podcast is to connect listeners with diverse authors globally. We've featured writers from Australia, Scotland, Europe, South Africa, the United States, and across Canada, spanning various genres. Saskatchewan, and Swift Current specifically, boasts a thriving creative community. I was honored to participate as a local writer at an event I'm pleased to share with our audience on brewing fiction. What follows is a recording of Write Out Loud, Local Writers' Night, held at the Lyric Theatre in Swift Current, Saskatchewan.
Welcome to Write Out Loud's Local Writers' Night. My name is Jackie Cameron, and I'm a member of the Write Out Loud committee here at the Lyric Theatre. Because we are all treaty people, we begin by acknowledging that this event, the Lyric Theatre and Swift Current stand on the traditional lands known as Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories, and we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past. We are committed to moving forward in a partnership with the Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Please help us make the Lyric a safe and peaceful place for all who enter here. This winter has been a very difficult and often a very cold time for those in southwest Saskatchewan. As a result, several of our volunteers who often are here are at home nursing a flu or a cold or both. We hope they feel better soon. We owe a special thank you to our great group of Lyric volunteers, without whom the show would not go on. Thank you to tonight's volunteers. Members at the doorway, Leland was there to take your tickets. At the bar, Michelle is serving, and Dixie is the cashier. Members of the Write Out Loud committee, which is a small group tonight, are Tina Marie Litwinick, Trish Aries, who is also a board member, and myself. We appreciate the support of the Lyric staff. Front of house is Maria Doyle. Sound, lights, and all things technical, Mark Ruel. We extend a special recognition to our Write Out Loud and Lyric supporters, Sask Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, City of Swift Current, S3 Group, who is our hall sponsor, Saskatchewan Arts Board, the Coast Hotel, and Nightjar Restaurant. Tonight's events features local authors. So we're going to start with 2 readings before the break. We will have a little break so you can top up your refreshments and visit, and then we will have the last 2 authors read. So let's welcome our first author.
Award-winning journalist Bonnie Allen has 26 years of experience reporting for TV, radio, and digital media across Canada and Africa, notably with CTV and CBC. Currently CBC's Saskatchewan National Reporter, she's received awards for her coverage of intimate partner homicide and the overdose crisis. In 2022, she was a Canadian Screen Award nominee for Best Local Reporter. During the Write Out Loud event, Bonnie shares excerpts from the manuscript of her future novel entitled Mother Bird. Take a listen.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm originally from Bateman, and just moved to Swift Current last year with my husband and our 2 children. So I still work for CBC, but from the home office. And as Jackie said, I've dedicated my life to journalism, nonfiction, but during the pandemic started writing creatively, because contrary to what some people believe, I don't make things up in my day job, and found that writing fiction was a nice release. And so I started working on a novel and began collaborating with a friend named Sarah, who is a former refugee from South Sudan. So we have finished our manuscript. It's called Mother Bird, and it's about a South Sudanese woman who moves her family to a small prairie town with more secrets than people. And it has more than one narrator, including the woman who sponsored the refugee family, who did so believing it would be the answer to keeping the local school open. I'm going to read some pages to you from the perspective of the South Sudanese woman, Niatut. So I'll read one chapter and then just jump ahead to another chapter. So Mother Bird, Juba, South Sudan, July 2016, Niatut. I wail over my husband's body, certain of only one thing. My grief is being watched and measured. Not a single tear rolls down my cheeks. I must do better. From my belly, I scream his name like a rabid hyena. Gatluak, you bastard, I think. I don't dare make eye contact with the slack-jawed strangers elbowing their way closer to Gatluak, his skinny arms and legs splayed out on the packed orange dirt. They will see through my charade. In this God-forsaken place, grief is the one thing people know well. I've seen other widows writhe on the ground, flopping and twisting about like possessed snakes, scratching their faces and tearing out their hair, but I'm not willing to go that far. Gatluak doesn't deserve it. Still, I need to do what's expected. I drop to my knees, howl, and beg God to spare him. The sharp tang of burnt plastic and straw scratches at my eyes, and they begin to water. How convenient. The cracked tombstones where we hang our drying clothes do nothing to shade me as I slump over Gatluak's naked corpse, sweat dripping from my brow onto his bulging eyes. I'm guessing the soldiers interrupted his mid-afternoon nap when they stormed our cemetery slum, then shot him in the gut. Killed in a graveyard. How fitting, really. Gatluak had talked big, as he always did, about finding a better life in the capital, far from the violence and starvation of the north. Psst. Empty promises. We've been living like rats in St. Mary's Cemetery, sleeping among the dead. Mama, I hear the question in Bull's tiny voice. I turn my body toward my youngest, bunched up with his 4 brothers, their lips quivering. They're trying not to cry. Gatluak didn't allow it. Bull rubs his face and smears snot across his cheek. I want to wrap him in the folds of my skirt and shield his eyes, but as always, Gatluak comes first. The irony isn't lost on me. It was my husband's selfishness that saved our lives. He's the one who insisted the children and I scavenge for bananas left to rot on the sandy back streets of Juba during the hottest part of the day. Down on our knees, brown mush under our fingernails, we heard the crackle of gunfire from a few blocks away, the hooting of zealous soldiers, the terror, then the silence. My insides clench at my children's pain. I had wished their father dead countless times and even imagined killing him myself, a much more painful death. But at this moment, I pity them for the loss of the man they believed him to be. The least I can do is give them the memory of a grieving mother. I collapse on top of Gatluak's bare chest and release another tortured moan. A quiet murmur in the crowd begins to grow louder. Ay, 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 we have to bury him. There's no time. They could come back. We'll all be killed. Poor Gatluak. The woman who sells okra in the market stall next to mine squeezes my shoulder. Niatut, I'm so sorry. We have to go, she says in my ear. We can't bury him. I should be horrified. My husband is being deprived of a quick burial, as is tradition among our newer tribe, but I'm not. I want to leave him to the flies and the ghosts, a small act of rebellion after years of obedience. Since the day before my 16th birthday, I have kept his house, bore his children, milked his cows, and had my legs spread by him every night, every damn night. Still, it would seem odd if I abandoned him too willingly. No, I scream, clinging to his body. The blood seeping from Gatlowek's innards is warm and sticky. The woman backs away from me slowly. She's right, we have to go. I'm seized by a fear so sharp, so surprising, my next scream catches in my throat and I cough. I've only ever pictured Gatlowek dead, never the hours and days afterward. What now? I don't even know if we can get out of Juba. Government troops are killing newer people at checkpoints around the capital. The peace deal is a joke. The big men with their fat bellies and soft hands are always looking for ways to stuff their own pockets with oil riches and aid money. Greed, power, tribal loyalty. No one really knows anymore what's driving men to kill and rape, but it will not stop. Perhaps I can go home. A sliver of hope bores through my fear as I consider the possibility. In my darkest hours, I've imagined myself as a caged lioness biding my time until I can return to my pride. A journey north to my parents' village would be difficult, dangerous. My hand shoots inside the neckline of my dress, digging down into my bra. I breathe out in relief, my fingers closing around the small stash of cash I keep hidden against my left breast, along with a crinkled black and white photo. At Niutu, I tip my head back and stare up at the boy. At 6'6", he has to bend his knees and back in order to haul me to my feet. Auntie, he says, you must leave him. I'm sorry, we have to go right now. He speaks quietly but firmly. His high cheekbones jut out while his calm eyes crease at the sides. I feel myself sway toward him, drawn to his strength. It impresses me that a 15-year-old can remain so cool-headed after losing his parents. Or perhaps, like me, he's just good at hiding his feelings. My gaze follows the wisps of black smoke that drift over charred treetops, past a lone, heart-shaped mango that hangs from a blackened branch, its green and orangey skin unscathed by the fire. I wonder how it survived, and whether its sweet pulp has turned bitter inside. Come, we'll go together, he says. I nod, giving up any pretense of crying. I gather the rest of the children and run out of the graveyard without looking back. And so now we skip ahead to her next chapter. Something to drink, ma'am? I stare at the white woman with the perfect white teeth and perfectly coiffed blonde hair. She glides toward me, pushing a metal cart while I grimace and pull the belt tighter across my stomach. It's hard for me to breathe. I steal a glance out the airplane window. The blue sky and white clouds aren't comforting. If God wanted me to fly, he'd have given me wings. Ma'am, cold water? Hot tea? I blink slowly. She's not the first white person I've ever seen. There were some in the refugee camp. They slathered thick cream on their egg-colored skin tinted red from the blazing sun. They wore blue vests, carried clipboards, always carrying clipboards, and told people what they could and couldn't do. They loved to say no and talk about rules. But this one seems eager to please me. It's baffling. I wonder if she has any idea that I've never had an ice cube in my drink, or that I spent an hour every morning standing in line at the pump station to get drinking water for the day, or that if I wanted tea, I walked 2 to 3 hours to gather firewood in a forested area on the outskirts of the refugee camp. Of course she doesn't. Why would this glossy woman know any of that? The woman's smooth hand with clean fingernails waves a package in the air. Maybe some pretzels? She'll have those and water, thank you, Dax says from across the aisle. I shoot him a look of gratitude. Absolutely, my pleasure. She opens silver drawers full of cans and tiny bottles, all lined up with military precision. Her fingers move deftly as she twists a cap, releasing a fizzing sound, and pours clear liquid into a plastic cup. Here you go. It's sparkling water, ma'am. I nod as though that makes sense to me. The bubbles burn the back of my throat and I cough, then wonder why water needs to sparkle. If you need anything else, you just push that button right above you. There you see it, and I'll come running. She pats my arm and floats away with her magical cart. Let me open those for you. Dak leans over with his long arm and rips open the small plastic package, scattering the brown, twisty snacks on my lap and the floor. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Here, let me get those, Auntie. I shoo him away. He sits back, but I can feel his eyes on me, watching. He's always trying to help me and the children. I bend forward to pluck the pretzels from the carpeted floor, but my seatbelt is too tight for me to reach them. "Let me do it, Auntie," Dax says, unbuckling his belt and dropping to his knees before I can stop him. He has to bend his long body at an awkward angle to fit into the narrow space between the seats arranged in neat rows. His jean-clad legs block the aisle. Excuse me, leave it, please leave it." The shiny woman in the starched navy uniform swoops in. "We'll clean it up later. Do you want more snacks? A cold drink? Maybe a Coke or Sprite? We have hot drinks too. Coffee? Tea?" I close my eyes and try to block out this onslaught of choices. It's too much. "She's fine." Dak to the rescue again. But he is wrong. I don't feel fine. "Mama, I have to pee." My son squirms in the seat next to mine, groping his crotch. "Hey, boy, don't touch yourself." "I have to pee." Dak jumps to his feet. "There's a bathroom at the back of the plane." "No!" "Shh," I say, embarrassed by Bull's loud screech. An important-looking man in the seat in front of us, one row in front of us and across the aisle, briefly glances over his shoulder, but just as quickly returns his attention to a laptop. "I'll take him," Dak says. Bull curls his legs up to his chest and hides his face. I don't blame him. The idea of using a bathroom in the sky is as terrifying as being in the sky. I don't want to think about Bull falling down the toilet and plummeting to his death. "Hold his hand." "While he's peeing? Do I have to remind you how boys pee?" Dak chuckles and makes a funny face at my son. "Come on, little man. Let's show your mom how brave you are." My son obediently follows him down the aisle. I smile. Dak has a way of convincing people to do things. I know I rely on him too much, but who can blame me? I think back to those early days after my husband was shot. I'd been so naive to think I could travel north to my parents' village. We hid for days in the bush south of Juba, drinking puddle water and scrounging for nuts and fruit, terrified the army would hunt us down. It was there in the darkness Dak had come up with a plan. Oh, I thought it was insane, but he said it was our only hope. We crossed over into northern Uganda and said all the right things to the people in the blue vests. Each morning I set out in search of anyone who might have information about my parents, while Dak built a mud and thatch hut on our allotted land and planted beans, corn and peanuts. Each night as I collapsed in defeat, Dak told me the same thing. Just stick to the plan. I said I'd take care of the family, and I will. But the days turned to weeks and months. The soil wasn't good and the rains didn't come. Within 4 months, 270,000 refugees filled the camp. The people in uniforms bulldozed even more trees, and we had to walk further and further to find firewood to cook our measly rations. We ran out of food and sat hungry while we waited for the next distribution day, when we'd herd together hungry, nameless, to be given our maize, beans, vegetable oil, salt, and soap. There were barely any teachers, and I couldn't afford uniforms or exam fees. The children who had been excited to go to school stayed home. Even Dak, who loved school, dropped out. The day came when I finally heard news from my village. The boda driver, who had come from the cattle camp on his motorcycle, said he saw father die. He could tell me nothing about Ma. And still, Dak promised me everything was going to be okay. As I stoked the fire under a pot of beans, I'd had enough. "Boy, stop telling lies. Nothing good here." "I have a plan, Auntie. I will get us out of here, I promise." "Shh, don't make promises you can't keep." "I keep my promises," he said, raising his voice. The fierce look in his eyes startled me. "I will get us out of this camp." "You can't stop the war, and until the war stops, we cannot go home. We will wait here in the camp and pray to God." "I don't want to wait," he said. "I'm going to get us to Canada." I jammed a stick into the embers, listening to the crackle and flicker of flames. I was having second thoughts about his plan. South Sudan is our home. We need to stay close. There's nothing left for us here. I wanted to scream at him that I couldn't leave without knowing what happened to my mother, but I didn't want to see his look of pity. He'd think I was foolish to imagine she might still be alive. I told myself war scattered families all the time. Going too far away would make me feel like I was abandoning her. "Nothing? You turn your back on your motherland so quickly," I said, jutting my chin higher in the air. "Don't forget who we are. We are newer people. I can trace my family back 12 generations. If we lose our connection to them and to the land, who will we be?" Dak stood and nudged me away from the bubbling beans. Let me stir. Boy, I said. I looked around to see if anyone was watching us, afraid of what people might think. Men do not cook. This boy just couldn't leave things the way they were. You're tired, Auntie. Let me help you. The traditions you hold on to, your children are suffering, and you're letting it happen. If it had been anyone else, I might have slapped him. I was the closest thing he had to a mother, and children do not challenge their parents. It's our home. Auntie, I want to go home too, I do, and one day we will go back, but first we must try for a better life. A better life? I'd heard that promise before. People who go to America don't come back. Says who? My mom, her sister Joyce, went to Canada during the last war, and we never heard from her again. My mother always said going overseas is like dying. Dak took the pot off the fire. Things are different now. There's cell phones, the internet. Little good it's done us here, I spit out the words. Auntie will be safe in Canada with jobs, school, food. His voice vibrated with passion. All our dreams will come true. I jabbed my chewing stick in my mouth and scraped along my gums. Silly boy. There was no time for dreams when my children's bellies were swollen and their eyes were empty. But Dak wasn't my husband. He wasn't like my husband. Perhaps it was his optimism that scared me most. Was he right? Or would these dreams of his destroy his soul? If we go, the little ones won't remember South Sudan, I argued. They won't know our culture. A tree without roots will never bear fruit. Is this our culture? Here in the camp, begging for food, not working, not going to school? This isn't who we are. You want your children to be hopeless? We both knew this wasn't a fair argument. No mother wanted that. And what did I know? Despite his young age, Dak seemed so certain, so confident. It was easier just to let him make decisions. Deference was something I was good at. So we stood for hours under giant white tents and answered questions just as we'd practice. And just as he predicted, being a single mother with 12 children under my care put me in the most vulnerable category and earned me priority consideration for private refugee sponsorship. You're perfect, one sweaty man said as he inspected the stack of forms Dak had painstakingly filled out in his 11th grade English. You check all the boxes. I didn't know whether to be proud of myself for achieving his perfectly pathetic status. And now I'm hurtling through the air in a giant vibrating box. I did it, Bull says, back from the bathroom, proud of his accomplishment. His pants are pulled up nearly to his chest, leaving his ankles bare. Good boy. Dak slides into his seat, his lips pursed, his eyes darting over at me. I know him well enough to know he's working up the courage to say something I might not like. What? You need to smile. I smile. You didn't smile at the lady. You have to smile. I didn't feel like smiling. Auntie, please. I lean back against the headrest. He points to the screen embedded in the seat in front of him. It shows a map of our flight path, a glowing line arcing its way across the ocean. The pretzels and bubbly water aren't sitting well in my stomach. We're really doing it, he says, his voice a mix of wonder and disbelief. We're flying to Canada. I make myself smile at him, ignoring the queasy feeling in my gut. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Those were two very interesting chapters that you read.
Livia Clark, a writer passionate about character-driven plots, is also a trained musician and librarian with a focus on arts access. Her lifelong love of stories fuels her goal of becoming a published speculative fiction author. Take a listen to an excerpt from her first draft of the working title, To Live This Life.
So, just to tell you a little bit about my novel, this particular story has been percolating in my imagination for a long time. From what I can recall, at its beginning, I was living on Vancouver Island at the time. I had a job at a library, and my main task was to shelve books and put materials away for large chunks of the day. My mind was bored, and so to pass the time, I would make up stories. Another important thing to know about me is that I am a worrywart, to put it lightly. So I'm living and working on Vancouver Island, and I thought, how on earth would I get home to Saskatchewan if World War III broke out. I live on an island on the wrong side of the Rocky Mountains. And I was like, what would I do? And that was how this story started taking shape. Because I thought, what would ordinary people do, like me, in that situation? And of course, I also had to make this story thrilling and exciting and romantic. So the excerpt I wanted to read for you today is one of my favorite action scenes from the book. So to give a little bit more setting of the actual story, while this book deals with the fallout of geopolitics and global war, I was not interested in writing a book about geopolitics and global war, or what might actually cause World War III. So I focus very little on that aspect. My characters are in essence on the side that is defending Canada. The enemy is a mixture of invaders and domestic individuals who joined them. There are three main characters, sisters Charlotte and Megan and their friend Jack, whom Charlotte falls in love with earlier in the book. They were all university students when war broke out, and their paths crossed when they all decided to join the war effort. The scene I'm reading for you today is in the latter half of the book, when Charlotte, without Megan or Jack, has been captured by the enemy and being held at their base in the mountains. A fellow captive, a doctor, Riley, tasked with taking care of her after she has been wounded in the process of her own capture, decides he has to get her out before the enemy really kills her. So without further ado, here is an excerpt from my novel. Working title is To Live This Life. As Charlotte slept, he, Riley, left the room. He told the two guards that he needed morphine and bandages, a usual request, so they let him go and get them himself. They couldn't be bothered to walk him back and forth anymore, as he never caused them any trouble. Riley had been counting on this response. He walked, but instead of turning right towards the supply room, he turned left. He waited a moment, but the guards did not call out or follow him. He kept going, watching out for other guards. He eventually came to one of the prison aisles. Sam was in the first room on the left. Riley saw him laying down on his cot with his head by the bars. He crouched down and spoke near Sam's head. "Sam!" Sam jerked up and whipped his head around to see what was happening. "Geez, Riley, what are you doing here?" Riley put his finger to his lips. "Shh. Do you want to get out of here? I have a plan." Sam locked eyes with Riley and stared at him sternly. He slowly smiled and answered, "Absolutely, I want to get out of here. Let's do this thing." Riley hesitated, then added, "We need to get Charlotte out too." Sam shook his head. "She's a high-profile asset to them. They aren't just going to let her walk away." Riley replied, "Oh yes, they will, if I have anything to do with it. If we don't get her out of here now, she'll die. They'll kill her before she tells them anything, and they are realizing that. Please, it has to be in the morning. We're going to steal a helicopter. You can fly one of those things, right? I heard you could from Kelpie." Sam groaned. Kelpie has a big mouth. "Yeah, I can. You know this is suicide, right?" He sighed and continued, "Well, they'll kill me eventually anyway, because I'm never fighting for them." Riley quickly filled Sam in on the rest of the plan. He then hurried back along the hallways and found the dispensary, grabbed the morphine and bandages, but got triple what he usually got. He took 3 syringes from the shelf and also grabbed a spare scalpel. He walked back to Charlotte's room. The first guard spoke. "You were gone longer than usual. What happened? You get lost?" Riley replied, "No, sorry, there was a small delivery and it hadn't been put away yet, so I sorted it out. Sorry." The guard grunted and let him re-enter the room. Riley breathed easier once the door was shut behind him. He filled 2 syringes with a large dose of morphine and put them on a table close to the door. He took a 3rd syringe and put a very small amount in it and gave it to Charlotte. He whispered more to himself than to her, "I need you alert tomorrow, so you might have a rough night." To make the escape plan work, he needed a reason to leave the room once more that night. He grabbed the patient dish from beside Charlotte and grimaced at what he was about to do, but it had to be done. He forced himself to throw up into the dish. After several attempts, he succeeded. Sounds of disgust escaped him. Ugh, blech. He drank some water, then grabbed the scalpel and let it sink to the bottom of the dish. He then took a cloth and draped it lightly over it. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning by this point. He opened the door once again, and the guards who had been drowsing against the wall jerked awake. "What are you doing, Doc?" the first guard asked him, stepping over and lifting the cloth off the dish without asking. The smell greeted everyone's noses. Gross. Ugh. Deal with that. Riley bent his head and apologized. I'm sorry, but Charlotte has been sick and I didn't want to stink up the room with it. Can I take it to the toilets around the corner? The guards nodded while holding their noses. Riley smiled to himself as he walked away down the hall. He turned left, and as soon as he knew he was out of eyesight, he ran as quickly and quietly as he could back to Sam. He gently tiptoed up to Sam's cell. Psst, Sam, here, use this to break out in the morning. Riley fished the scalpel out of the dish. Sorry about the smell and, Sam glared at Riley. Gee, thanks. Riley whispered, repeating the key aspect to their plan. Don't forget, come to Charlotte's room at 6 a.m., sharp. Sam nodded, then tucked the disgusting scalpel under his pillow. Riley ran back down the hall and dealt with the dish in the bathroom. As he walked back, the guards were leaning their heads against the wall again. He thanked them and went back into the room. Once back inside, with Charlotte, he breathed a little easier. He walked over to his chair and quietly lifted it and set it down right beside her bed. She was so still. Her chest rose and fell with small breaths, and her face twisted with a hint of a nightmare every few moments. He let her sleep a bit longer, but gradually his hand found its way into hers. He held her hand so tenderly. He knew that she could never be his, but he found himself full of illogical hope. Maybe something would happen to Jack. Maybe she would have a change of heart and decide that she loved him and not Jack. Maybe. He knew how selfish his thoughts were, and he knew that he could never tell her what was in his mind. Despite this, Riley was willing to risk everything for her. To risk everything to get her free. He held her hand and let her sleep. He watched the hours tick by on the clock. Finally, it was just past 5 o'clock in the morning. He let go of her hand and gently shook her shoulder. She groaned as her eyelids fluttered open. Confused for a moment, she focused on him as he held a finger to his lips. He whispered, Sorry to wake you, but we are breaking out of here this morning. We need to get ready as quietly as possible. Her eyes grew rounder and more alert as he talked. She listened as he outlined the entire plan, including Sam joining them at 6 o'clock. She didn't question him about any of the details. In fact, she didn't say anything. Riley helped her to slowly and quietly get up off the bed. She was still in her hospital gown, so he grabbed her old clothes and helped her put them on. Her injuries made it so she couldn't really bend over. He held her jeans low as she put her hand on his shoulder to balance and step into them. He gently eased the jeans up her legs and over her hips. She chuckled softly and whispered, I didn't think I'd need help getting dressed again until I was in my 90s. He smiled. He helped her get her shirt on as well. All her injuries compounded gave her very little range of motion. He had wrapped a fresh bandage around her torso wound, because even though she had been shot over a week ago, it still hadn't healed shut. Every day seemed to present a situation that meant it was ripped open again. It was then that Riley saw Charlotte with fresh eyes. She looked horrible. Her color was really off. Her hair was stringy and greasy. The shadows under her eyes were incredibly dark, and her face was pale and wan. It wasn't just that she couldn't bend to dress, she didn't have the energy. She was dying. How had he not seen it earlier? It would be a miracle if this plan worked for them to escape, but they would need another miracle for her to survive at all. Riley didn't know much about praying, but he prayed with all his might then. Charlotte had realized Riley was holding her hand in the night, but hadn't shaken it away. She felt so tired. It was harder and harder to be awake. She thought God had saved her in the woods for a purpose, but now she wondered why, when she was just going to die soon anyway. She remembered that she had shared the gospel with Riley a few nights ago. Maybe that had been why. As Riley helped her to dress, she prayed for strength to get away from this hellish place. She wanted to go home. She thought of Jack, his kind eyes, the smell of his hair, the feeling of his lips on hers. Would she ever see him again? Once they were dressed, Riley put on his white doctor's coat and held up a spare one for Charlotte to put her arms through. You'll blend in more if you look like you work here. I have one for Sam, too. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly time. Charlotte went and sat in the chair and slumped back. There, do I look like I passed out? He tried not to let it show just how much it looked like she had passed out, and said, Good enough, yeah. Ready? She nodded and leaned her head back. Riley stood in the blind spot behind the door, a syringe in each hand. He was poised and ready. He called out loudly, "Hey! Hey, I need some help in here!" A second later, the 2 guards burst into the room. "What is it? What's wrong?" Riley lunged towards them and stuck one guard in the back of his neck and depressed the plunger. The first guard yelped and fell as Riley pushed him as he stuck him. The second guard had managed to turn around, and Riley missed him as he jerked to the side, avoiding the syringe. Riley managed to grab the guard's uniform and yank him towards himself. He tried to bring his right hand up to stick it in his neck, but the guard blocked him again. Riley would not relinquish his hold on the guard's shirt. After another moment of struggling, he used all his strength to stick the syringe through the guard's sleeve. He did it and pressed the top down. After another moment of struggling, the guard went limp and slumped to the floor. Breathing hard, he looked down at the 2 guards. He hoped they wouldn't die, but he wasn't sure if what he had done was fatal or not. Charlotte got up and was standing at the entrance. "Sorry I couldn't help to hold them or something. Not as fast as I once was." Riley waved his hand, gesturing it was no big deal. She gave a small smile, enjoying his need to be the tough guy around her. It felt longer than it was, but only a moment later, she gave a sigh of relief when Sam poked his head around the corner at the end of the hall. Seeing her there, he came around and ran towards her. Riley pulled the handguns out of the guards' holsters and handed one to Charlotte and kept one. Sam would need all his attention focused on the helicopter when they got outside. Sam surveyed what had happened in the room and said quietly, "Good work. You 2 ready to go?" They both nodded. Charlotte answered, "Ready as I'll ever be." Riley handed a 3rd doctor's coat to Sam, who quickly put it on. All 3 of them made their way silently down the hall. Charlotte had her hand on the gun, but was concealing it in her coat pocket. Riley saw what Charlotte was doing and copied. He was taken back by how comfortable she was with a gun. He forgot that she was a soldier and a commander. Despite everything, Charlotte's stride was strong and her mind alert. She had to give this everything she had, or she knew she wouldn't make it out. Riley's hands were shaking. He couldn't help but feel that if they were caught, none of them would receive mercy. Sam was reviewing the steps to starting and flying a helicopter in his mind. If he couldn't remember how to do that, then this whole attempt at escape was pointless. Charlotte hadn't thought to ask Riley if he knew the way, but pretty quickly it was clear that Sam knew where he was going. She was blindly following him. After several long hallways and more turns than she could count, she had no idea where she was. Finally, they came to a short hallway with windows along it. On the other side of those windows was a runway full of helicopters, 10 in total. The helicopters were about 60 meters down the runway from their building. She couldn't see anyone around, but that was a lot of empty, exposed ground to cover. Sam paused by the door and said, "We should probably make a run for it. They have guard huts built into the side of this building for shelter. They huddle there in the mornings, but they are still there and pretty alert." "Charlotte, can you run?" She nodded and replied, "I'm ready." Riley spoke up. "Let's make for the second one in on the right. It'll give us cover if we need it." Just as he was finished speaking, a loud yell came from further in along the hall. "Hey, stop!" Riley pushed Sam and Charlotte through the doors and yelled, "Run!" Sam led the way as they started to run towards the helicopters. Various shouts from all directions began to fill the air. Riley gripped his handgun and, still running, glanced behind him, shot without aiming towards the group of guards. The guards crouched and momentarily held themselves back. Charlotte did likewise to Riley and half turned and shot several times in the rebels' vague direction. Several bullets started to whiz by them as they kept running. Sam had been speedier and raced ahead to the chopper. He had it running with the blades beginning to whir by the time the other 2 reached it. Riley stopped and hid behind the back end of the chopper behind them and the guards, every few seconds poking around and shooting towards them. Charlotte had hopped on and yelled, "Riley, come on!" He spun around and ran the few steps towards the chopper and jumped. She yelled, "Now, Sam!" Sam pushed the controls hard, and the chopper shot upwards. Charlotte looked around her. She saw a bag of gear on the floor. She quickly opened it and, seeing hand grenades, grabbed one with each hand. She pulled the pin out of one and threw it down onto the helicopter that was below them, and quickly pulled the pin out of the second one and threw it out the other side, hoping it would hit a second chopper. The 2 blasts jerked their own helicopter forward as Sam took off. Charlotte sat down on the chopper seat and struggled to get herself strapped in. Riley had managed to clip himself in. Bullets filled the air around them, but as Sam got the chopper up to speed, they quickly fell out of range of the enemies below. As Charlotte fought to get the buckle clipped in, she noticed that blood was seeping through the front of her shirt again. Forgetting about the strap, she stared at the blood and then looked over at Riley. He locked eyes with her and realized what was about to happen. She passed out. At that moment, Sam noticed a chopper closing in behind them. He yelled, "Hold on, guys," and took a sharp turn to avoid the side of the mountain and confuse the chopper behind him. Riley had just reached out and grabbed Charlotte's arm before she would have slid out and fallen to the ground far below. "Level out, Sam, level out! She's not strapped in yet!" he yelled back. "Hurry up!" Sam leveled out the chopper and Riley held Charlotte in her seat. He took 2 deep breaths and undid his own strap and took the step which felt like a mile toward Charlotte. He got her strap done up, but as he did so, he realized how badly she had torn open her wound. Her entire front was soaked with blood. He grabbed the seatbelt from his chair and wrapped it around his arm. He then knelt beside Charlotte and put pressure on her wound with his other hand. "Hurry up, we're losing her!" Sam decided to go for the straight path out of the mountains and just gun the speed. The chopper behind them fell away as Sam went faster than he ever had before. This helicopter wasn't meant for high speed, but it was all or nothing now. "Faster, Sam!" Sam grabbed the radio handset. He was heading at high speed for Fort Cambridge. He knew how to find it by sight, but he also knew that if they came in this hot, they would shoot them out of the sky. He held the button down on the handset. "Chopper to Fort Cambridge. We're coming in fast with critically injured on board. Come in, Fort Cambridge." Sam repeated himself twice, but no one answered. Riley tried to get Charlotte to wake up. Lightly slapping her cheek, he said, "Charlotte, please wake up, please. Don't give up now. Sam, go faster!" Sam yelled back, "They will shoot us out of the sky if I go any faster. They aren't answering the radio." Riley hopped up and reached through to the front. "Hand it to me, quick." Sam handed it back to him, and Riley yelled into the handset, "Chopper to Fort Cambridge. We have Captain Charlotte Eyre wounded on board. Repeat, we have Captain Charlotte Eyre on board. Requesting permission to land." There was a moment of silence, then a voice crackled through the other side. Permission granted to land. The fort came into view as the mountains faded behind them. The pursuing chopper had given up, recognizing the same risk that Sam and Riley were worried about. Sam kept up his speed until finally the fort's runway was beneath them, and he eased the chopper down. He saw that a huge circle of armed soldiers was forming and pointing every weapon right at them. As the helicopter landed and Sam turned it off, he raised both hands into the air. Riley unwrapped his arm and unbuckled Charlotte. He eased her off of the seat and down to the floor of the helicopter so that he would be able to lift her down from the ground. Hopping down out of the chopper, he turned around and put one arm under her knees and one under her back and lifted her down. He turned around and began to carry her away from the chopper when a team of doctors ran over with a gurney. Riley laid her down on it, and before he could say anything, a soldier grabbed his shoulder and forced him to the ground. Riley lay face down with his arms outstretched. He watched as much as he could with his face being forcibly pushed into the pavement. As they wheeled Charlotte quickly away, the soldiers had grabbed Sam and forced him to the ground as well. The chopper was being assessed to make sure it wasn't one giant bomb. To Riley, it felt like everything was happening in slow motion. The wind from the still spinning chopper blades was blowing his hair into his eyes. The pavement smelled strongly of gasoline and rubber. The soldiers were yelling instructions back and forth. He wasn't truly hearing any of their words because the only thing that filled his mind was that she had a chance now. They could save her. For Charlotte, the helicopter ride had barely begun by the time she had passed out. She had jumped in, flung the grenades, and they had taken off at a breakneck speed. She'd barely sat in her seat when she started to feel lightheaded. She looked down and placed her hand on her abdomen wound. It came away bloody. It was like her body could now only focus on one thing, simply keeping her breathing. The darkness claimed her and she passed out. She remembered nothing of the ensuing air chase and dramatic landing at Fort Cambridge. She vaguely remembered eventually seeing shapes move and loud noises and strange tingling sensations. There was a moment, however, that happened which was more clear to her than any she had ever experienced. The chaos and pain of what was happening around her faded away. She found herself standing in a calm, beautiful, lush forest. Birds were twittering and the soft sound of a stream was nearby. She looked down and saw her clean bare feet poking out from beneath a soft, cream-colored summer dress. Her hair was loose and long, hanging about her shoulders. She felt safe, calm, warm, and peaceful. Then she saw a figure walking towards her through the trees. "Jack!" Charlotte yelled out and ran towards him. He ran too, and they embraced. She kissed him and laughed. He smiled and laughed too. She noticed that the worry lines and the world's burdens no longer framed his eyes, and his shoulders no longer had that slight hunch of anxiety. What was this place? She never wanted to leave it, or Jack. She turned her head as she thought she'd heard another voice calling her through the trees. "Did you hear that, Jack?" she asked. He lightly touched her chin to focus her on him again. "Charlotte, it's not your time. Your fight isn't done yet." Her face turned somber as she answered, "I'm so tired, Jack. I'm so tired of fighting. I want it to be over. I want to be with you, but I'm so tired." Jack replied, "Be brave, Charlotte. We have so much to keep fighting for, so much love to give. Go back. Go back." She touched his cheek as a tear slid down her own. "I'm not strong enough." He gazed into her eyes and said, "With God's strength, you can conquer anything." She nodded. Jack gripped her hand as she turned, then she started running towards the edge of the forest. As she burst through the trees, she felt a heaviness leave her, and faintly she heard the voices of the doctors fighting for her life say, "Whoa, she's a fighter. All right, guys, she's back. I want someone by her side for the next 48 hours. She may yet make it." She felt herself fall asleep again as she thought the prayer, "God, I am yours. Help me do your will."
Thank you, Olivia. That was action-packed. It's interesting because we have different authors presenting their works. The subject areas vary greatly. We get to listen to quite a wide variety of types of stories. We're going to have a break now, but before we do that, on your table, there's a poster that the Prairie Quills writers are having a writing contest for students grades 6 to 8. If you have a student in your life or know somebody who's interested in writing, tell them about this contest. There is money for the top prize winners. They can write a short story or poetry. So share it with somebody that you know who likes to sit and write stories or write poems.
Doug Cameron has a PhD in agriculture and has worked at research stations and farmed before consulting on soils and the environment across Saskatchewan and internationally with SNC-Lavalin, FAO, and the World Bank. And he is also a former counselor to the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists. In his writing career, he's a Mark Twain Satire Award shortlisted author of 2 satires on regulatory bodies. Take a listen as Doug shares a little bit of his nostalgic memoir entitled The Tarzan Tree.
Sorry, just a minute here. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jackie Cameron. Jackie Cameron is my wife, but I've never been formally introduced by her. So I'm very pleased to be. Yeah, thank you, Jack. At any rate, I'd like to say thank you to all of you too, because it's a miserable night. It's been a miserable month, actually. But I saw in the forecast Friday it's going to go up to 0, and it looks to me like we're going to be holding around, +2, 0, -2 for the next 2 weeks. So that is good news. I'm tired of this thing. So my book is entitled My Tarzan Tree and Other Farm Boy Memories. Okay, and you see I have it all marked here with all that things. Well, that got to be ridiculous, so I actually photocopied the pages that I wanted to and put them on a little sheet before me. And so I'll carry on here. Then I'd like to thank a few people. First, Jackie, because she did the editing on it, and and it was fun. Well, we're still married anyways, so I guess we're okay here. Diane Miller, who some of you will know, was the editor of my book. And Betty McDougall, who's here tonight. Betty, thank you very much. She was a beta reader. Now, you probably wonder, what the hell is a beta? Oh, sorry. What is a beta reader? Well, a beta reader is somebody you send your book to just to see if it's okay. And so it wasn't too risque, so I guess she let it go. So we're okay on that. Thanks, Betty. And then we had some people here. I don't know where Theo Parker Hawkington's here or any other one, but they did the illustrations in the book, and I did appreciate that. So thank you, too, for doing that. So I'm going to say, first of all, I enjoyed writing this book. It was fun because it actually brought back quite a few memories from my boyhood. So I'm going to, let's start off with the Tarzan part. As a kid, the radio show Tarzan, Lone Ranger, and Superman were the three most popular radio shows we listened to, and there was 6 kids, well, there's 9 kids, but 6 kids are listening at one time to that radio show. Great big radio, 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide, 1.5 feet. It was one of the old radios. Battery operated initially and then plugged in once we got power. Tarzan, King of the Apes, was a beautiful radio story. It told about the adventures of Tarzan swinging on the vines through the African jungle. Best of all, I learned to imitate the Tarzan yell. Wow. That's my hero. So I would have been 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever when I listened to Tarzan and practiced that same yell. So I strived to imitate the Tarzan yell. He was my hero. Unfortunately, on our farm, we did not have any jungle vines to swing from. So I got the farm ropes, and they worked just as well. And the other problem that we had was no jungle trees. Luckily, for the boyhood Tarzan, our farm had 3 old willow trees. They were next to they were in a low area near the end of the forest, next to the pig pen. And the willows were a fantastic tree. So I would tie a rope and swing and practice my yell at the same time. It was through the willow tree. I'd make my cry, just like they did. Everybody would stop in their tracks and listen. Their hearts would be filled with fear. Imagination is a wonderful thing. Never let it go. Unfortunately, my Tarzan yell didn't resonate fear amongst the beasts. The pigs next door didn't shake with fear. They didn't care. Buster, our farm dog, he didn't care. There were no jungle animals around to really care. Nobody appreciated my eerie Tarzan yell. But that's okay. It's okay to experience a touch of reality. Put one's imagination down to earth. But when I escaped reality, I could still be Tarzan in my willow tree jungle. Tarzan was still my hero. So that's how the book got its name, My Tarzan, and other farm boy memories on that. Now, farming involves a lot of different things, and a lot of different animals and a lot of different parts. So this book skips through a life from being a toddler to going up to grade 9 or so. So it goes into 4-H and baseball and a few other things later on. But one of the things that we had on the farm, and that's on your handout, is Rex and Dusty were our friends. They were our 2 farm dogs. And they were our playmates during the day and our protectors at night. So when the coyotes were howling outside, they would bark at the coyotes. As little children, though, we don't, excuse me, I'll move that over here. We don't know what goes on in the adult world unless it affects us directly. So at this time, there were coyotes that were becoming very prevalent in our neighborhood. There was an increasing number of reports of coyotes attacking cattle and calves, sheep and hens and things, even attacking farm dogs. The community decided the coyote situation was getting out of hand and dangerous. So the farmers of the community got together, organized themselves into groups to hunt the predator. Now, this would be quite a few years ago, and I do remember as a little kid, I remember seeing the trucks, or at least one truck with about 5 or 6 farmers in the back with guns, and they were going to hunt the coyotes. However, coyote control was not limited to guns. There was also a lethal poison called strychnine, and I think we're all familiar with that. They would get a piece of old carcass from the farm, a dead pig, or maybe they had meat left over from something or the other. They'd put it out at the edge of the forest, kind of away from the farmyard, and then they'd smear strychnine on it. Unfortunately, Rex and Dusty somehow got a whiff of the meat, or maybe they heard the coyotes. They found it, they ate it, and they died. When the dogs failed to appear, Mom and Dad told us that what happened. We all burst into tears. It was so sad. I suspect we moped around for days. It was our first death in the family, and we weren't too sure how to handle it. There was talk about getting a new dog, but there was not a lot of enthusiasm. We really missed our dogs. The kids were not quite ready to give up our dear friends Rex and Dusty. As far as I know, strychnine was never used on our farm again. So that's the dogs. Dogs were very important farm things. Another important farm thing was thrashing. I was just a little kid when thrashing was in vogue. When we got older, the combines came in. Oliver Bernice was my boyhood hero. The Nice family lived about a mile southeast of us. Oliver and his team would help thrash. He had 2 beautiful Palomino horses, King and Queenie, to pull his hay rack. The hay rack was used to pick up the bundles and carry them to the thrash machine. The Palominos are the most beautiful horses in the world. Oliver's Palominos were a color of golden cream, kind of a light brown, and their manes and tails were a silvery white. So thrashing was a huge event for farm boys. I loved it because there was a lot of food, and I love food, and lots of activity. I always looked for Oliver and his horses, and he would come by. I'd be at right where the thrasher is, and he'd pick me up and put me on his hay rack. And then I learned how to do balance. You know, you've heard of sailor's legs. Well, we learned hay rack legs, where hay rack bounce up and down, up and down. You had to sort of learn to balance on that. So that was good. Now the mouth of the monster. Again, another picture of the thrash machine there. As a little farm boy, I found unloading bundles into the gaping mouth of the thrash machine was very scary. The bundles would be thrown in head first, one at a time. The whole front of the machine reminded me of an alligator mouth, wide open, with just a bottom jaw. The long jaw contained a feeder chain that moved the tossed bundles forward towards 2 huge, jagged teeth jaws, which would break the bundle up. It was very scary, and it was very noisy. The chains rattled and lots of other noises on the thrash machine. As a little boy, my biggest fear was falling off the bundle wagon into the jaw of the monster, where the feeder chain would drag me into the gaping mouth. I'd be shouting and shrieking, "Help! Help!" I'd be trying to scramble out before the double-edged saw-like rotating jaws would grab me up and rip me to pieces. It was such a dreadful thought. I preferred to be off the rack and on the ground before the unloading of bundles began. So that's a boyhood story, and it's a thrash machine, which was pretty scary for a little kid, especially those jaws. So that was one part of farming. So another part of farming is sometimes you get hired man or help to come in. And we had one hired man whose name was Tom McQuigan. Tom would help. Tom was an ornery old Irishman who worked with Dad, mainly helping building construction, things like granaries, barns, fences, etc., and sometimes farm work. He didn't like kids, and he didn't like dogs. He even shot at Rex one day. We generally stayed clear of him. But one day, after school, my best ever cousin, Gary Mills, and he was a really good cousin. We had a lot of fun together. We were looking for an adventure. He was at our farm. We spotted Tom. Tom was fixing something. We carefully snuck up behind a barrel close to him, and in unison we sang out, "Tom, Tom, the piper's son, stole a pig and away he run. Tom got beaten, the pig got eaten, Tom went running down the street." Tom's response was swift. "You boys get out of here or I'll throw the hammer at you." So we're small boys, so the challenge could not be passed up. So we snuck up to the barrel again, close, and we started to sing out, "Tom, Tom," that whoosh went the hammer right by our heads. Gary and I took off like a bat out of hell, and we never went back there. So that was Tom McQuiggan. I'll just say that when I went to university then, when I was in first year, Dad said, "You should go visit Tom, he's in the hospital." I didn't really know Tom, but it was kind of a sad story because he was dying of cancer. And so when I went in there, he didn't really, he recognized me, but didn't recognize me. And he would say, "You're Archie's boy. You're Archie's boy." Archie was my dad. And he'd grab my hand and he'd start crying, and he wanted me to tell him what we were doing. At any rate, it's kind of sad for me. So I will switch on to a new topic. Okay, so in addition on the farm, other than hired men and other things, thrashing, we had a chore ladder. Every farm has a chore ladder. So farm and household chores progressed as one got older. Gathering eggs was often the starting chore, and that was fun. I didn't mind gathering eggs. Then you'd work up to wood, bring in the wood, chop the wood, bring in the coal. You'd work up to picking stones in the summer, and then you go to milking cows. I was not a good cow milker. My sisters were good, my mom and dad were good, but I wasn't good. So they made me the cream separator boy. So my job, and there's a cream separator in the handout there, I was a useless cow milker. I became the boy who ran the cream separator. I'd carry the full milk pails to the cream separator, and I would turn the handle. It was a very hard handle to turn. And then the little gears inside the cream separator, if you had to turn it at the right speed and keep it so you get the maximum separation of cream from milk. And I was quite good at that. Yes, I was good at that. And not only that, but later on when we did get a Surge milk machine, I was the milk machine guy. And I didn't mind that either. I kind of liked that quite a bit. So the skim milk would always go to the pigs, to our cats, and to ourselves. The cream would be stored in a cream can. Dad sold his cream to the Northern Alberta Dairy Pool in Edmonton. The cream grading process was a bit disgusting to a little kid. A man from the pool would open the cream can and he'd insert a little dipper, take a little dipper and put it in his mouth, gurgle, 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 and then he'd spit it out in a slop pail beside him. And then he would, and I thought, yuck. And then he'd write down a grade, and my dad would take the grade, and then he'd wash it. He'd wash his mouth out with water, so he was clean. I felt sorry for the poor dairy pool guy. Milk is not my favorite drink, and this poor guy, he must have had pretty shot taste buds by the time he was through that work. Okay, so that's dairy, that's the cow. One of the chores, kind of, we had to do. Another chore we had to do was crushing grain. And again, there's a picture on the back side of the paper showing the actions for crushing grain. Cleaning manure from the barn and crushing grain were the two main Saturday chores that the 6 boys on the farm were given as they progressed up the chore ladder. Often that chore rotated, and every boy got a kick at the can. To run the chop grinder was run by a flat belt connected to a PTO on the Massey Harris 44 tractor with a semi-pulley on the grinder. Unfortunately, the feed grains, oats and barley, usually sometimes wheat, were on the wrong side of the belt. So we had to haul the grain in a 5-gallon pail by hand from the grain bin to the chop house. That was not an easy task. It involved filling up the pail, which was easy enough, carrying the pail to the belt, and then when you got to the belt, you had to lift the pail over the belt, and then you had to lift yourself over the belt. Now this is a belt 2 feet high and 6 inches wide, and it's running all the time, so you had to be a little bit careful. And then carrying the pail to the grinder was no problem once you got past the belt, and then dumping it in was good. The lucky sibling in the chop house was usually the youngest. At the end of the day, the shoveler would be covered from head to foot with a white coating of fine chop dust, flour, basically. We'd have to brush him off before we could bring him in the house to have noon lunch. Now, one more part here, maybe one more. Cleaning barns. I don't know whether people have been involved in cleaning barns, but I certainly did a lot of it. Cleaning the pig pens was a lot more difficult and stinky than cleaning up the cows. I love cows. Pigs, I'm not a fan of pigs. But they were very intelligent about going to the bathroom. Pigs will use one part of their pen for their toilet and the other part of their pen for sleeping quarters. So they were actually very smart. But on the other, when it comes to cleaning, pig poop is wet, very runny, and smells like ammonia. The rich aroma of ammonia would cling to our clothes. There were rare occasions when the siblings assigned to the weekend barn cleaning did not finish before the noon dinner. There were shouts and protests from the other siblings as they entered the house. They'd wash up, of course, but they wouldn't change their clothes, and sat down at the table. Nonetheless, we held our noses and weathered the ammonia storm, knowing that next week we may be the ones assigned to the barn detail. So you never know on doing chores. I will read one more selection, then I will quit. I'm going to read it. I haven't mentioned school. We had lots of school, and we had lots of church, and we had lots of youth groups, and we had lots of baseball, and lots of 4-H. But at any rate, this school one, it could deal with teachers. Could be lots of those too. One of them used to carry a strap in his pocket. And, at any rate, this one is the Halloween prank. The day after Halloween, some of the big boys bragged about tipping over outdoor toilets. Sure enough, at recess, the same big boys tipped over our outdoor toilet at school. Our school had indoor toilets, tanks, but they had one outdoor toilet, and so they tipped it over. I thought to myself, those boys are going to get a strap. Then some of the older boys got the idea it would be an even better Halloween trick if they could throw some of Mr. Morris's tools into the open pit beside the toilet. Mr. Morris was a principal who sometimes drove his Fortson tractor to school and kept his tools in the toolbox. I was a small school kid, so I really didn't like the idea, but the big kids said it was okay, so I guess it must have been okay. So let's see what happened here. It didn't take long for Mr. Morris to find out what had happened and who was responsible. The culprit, who shall remain anonymous, was paraded to the open toilet pit. He was told to roll up his shirt sleeves, take off his shoes, take off his socks, and roll up his pant legs. All the school kids stood around as he lowered himself into the muck and began to probe for the tools with his arms immersed in deep poo, fishing them out one at a time until he had them out of the pit. Then the culprit was paraded to the school water well where the other bigger kids pumped water. We had a water well, so you could pump water. Nowadays it's all taps and stuff, but it's water. And the culprit washed the crap off himself and the tools. Then everybody en masse followed Mr. Morris back down to the open toilet. The big boys were instructed to lift the toilet upright and put it back in its place where it should be. Once in place, Mr. Morris gave a reprimand to the big boys, telling them you should be old enough to know better and not set such a bad example to the smaller kids. Nobody got strapped, but the toilet was never tipped over again. Thank you.
Doug told a lot of the work and what went on in farm life. What he didn't tell were some of the fun stories about his favorite teddy bear, about playing in the hayloft and learning how to skate on a dugout. So although they had a lot of work to do, they also had a lot of fun. One of the things that I like when I was reading the book was it brings back memories. Even if you didn't live on a farm, something happened, and if you're our age, you would say, something like that happened to me, and you'd then tell a story. With the younger generation, they would say things like, did that really happen? And I don't know if they envy the life that we had in those days. I think they prefer what they have now.
Beyond my role as the creator of this podcast, I'm also a fiction writer. My fascination has always centered on suspense and horror, so it's only natural that I'm drawn to stories that explore darker themes. I find particular satisfaction in crafting stories that tell of traditional monsters and the supernatural. However, I must admit that the inherent cruelty and horror found within humanity often strikes me far more terrifying. My debut publication, a collection of microfiction titled Short Not Sweet, is currently available for purchase in both ebook and print formats. For Write Out Loud, I've had the pleasure of enlisting my daughter, Desiree, who is a remarkably talented actor. She has graced the stage of the Lyric Theatre on numerous occasions, including performances in several Shakespearean plays. She will be reading the first chapter of my short story, Wish Train, which will soon be featured in a compilation scheduled for release later this year.
Hi, everyone. I got to admit that being in front of a mic in front of live people is a little more terrifying than online doing the podcast. So a couple of things I'm pretty excited about this week. First of all, I am recording, or I guess Mark is recording this event tonight, and it is going to be featured on the podcast, which is pretty exciting for me. The fact that I actually am representing Swift Current on my podcast. I've interviewed authors from South Africa, Australia, so on and so forth, and with the exception of Devin Ullman, which I'm sure you all know, I haven't had the privilege of speaking to and listening to authors from Swift Current, so that is super exciting for me. Another thing that's really hard to believe is that I actually am releasing my first publication on Friday, as was mentioned. It's pretty surreal when I started writing 2 years ago. Basically, it was just a hobby of mine. My wife said, it's time for you to find a hobby. I don't know if I was driving her crazy or what was going on, but she recommended that I find a hobby, and that hobby turned into writing. I am a huge horror fan, and I decided to try my hand at it, and I'm enjoying it. So I'm not comfortable in front of people. I decided to invite Desiree, my daughter, to read for me, and she is quite comfortable. She'll put on a show up here for sure. As a matter of fact, she spent many hours putting off different plays and stuff here, so she'll be comfortable here. I'll just give a brief introduction. The story that she's going to be reading is the first chapter of 7 in a short story called Wish Train. It's one of the first stories that I had written when I decided that I was going to write professionally, and I wrote it in about 5 hours over a bottle of wine and a playlist on Spotify. And it's taken a couple iterations over the last year or two, But I do warn you, it's a little graphic. See how you react to the language. I do apologize in advance. Thank you all very much. Thank the Write Out Loud committee for inviting me. I was sent one invitation, which I declined because lack of confidence. And with the help of Desiree, they reached out again and convinced me to come here. So yeah, I guess I have to thank those people for that. So anyway, wish train.
Hi, everybody. As my dad said, I'm Desiree, and I'm going to read the first chapter of Wish Train for you all. Evan wakes to a train whistle and a loud rumble. The digital clock glows red next to the bed, reading 3:04 a.m. He rubs his eyes and looks around the room, unsure of where he is. Finally, he remembers he had checked into a motel room after his company's annual party. He sits on the edge of the bed as the night unfolds in his mind. He arrived at the lounge a few minutes before 8 p.m. As he entered, he heard whispers and stares from other employees. He sat alone in a corner booth and drank too much beer. Then, as always, he stumbled from the bar to a cab. Alone, of course, as he hadn't been with anyone since his last relationship 10 years ago. Fully awake now, he hears a hiss and a squeal of metal on metal. Is that a train? He wonders, and gets up and goes to the window. When he opens the curtain, an intense light shining from the parking lot blinds him, and he looks away to let his eyes adjust. Confused, yet curious, he steps to the room door and opens it, feeling the cool night air. He shades his eyes with his hand and looks toward the light. The light glows from a train engine facing the motel. But how is it facing the motel? He stands staring when realization sets in. Then Evan smiles and nods. Of course, this must be a dream. He takes a deep breath and can smell the heavy fumes of oil and diesel fuel. There is another hiss as the air in the braking system releases. But everything seems so real. Walking from the doorway of the motel room toward the hulking engine, Evan looks around for the railway tracks but doesn't see any. Looking into the distance, he notices a long line of bright yellow rail cars attached to the black and yellow engine. He swears the paint is emitting light instead of reflecting it. Turning toward the engine, he sees a reflection in the glossy black paint that startles him. A white skeletal face mirrors his movements. What the Evan closes his eyes and shakes his head. When he looks again, the only reflection he sees is of his face. Then from the corner of his eye, he sees someone walking toward him. A man waves his right hand before removing his tall black hat and tucking it under his arm. As he gets closer, Evan sees the guy is wearing a dark navy blue coat with brass buttons. A matching vest and pants with a black stripe down the side complete the uniform. His black hat has a wide brim and a gold-colored band that matches his buttons. Well, hello, sir. You must be the conductor of this train. The stranger smiles. I am indeed the conductor. My name is Evan. Welcome to my dream, he chuckles. Pleasure to meet you. My name is Eugene Sinclair. He turns toward the train and announces, and this is the Iron Empress. When the conductor says the name of the engine, Evan swears the yellow paint on the railcars pulses brighter. Let me assure you this is no dream, the conductor says. We are here at your request. My request? But I don't understand. You have been asking for a change. Wishing you could catch a break, is how you put it? The conductor pauses and stares at Evan. The Iron Empress is that break. The train pulses again. She can change your life. For a moment, Evan stands motionless, processing. He had said those words many times, but only to himself. All right, Evan says, tell me how it can do that. Quite simple, actually, the conductor says. You have already made your wish. Now you must choose a rail car and enter. Which car? Your choice. Each offers you a different future. Wait, the rail cars, what? Take me to a new world? Is it some sort of portal or a gate? Not a new world. You will remain in this one. But the Empress will change your past as you remember it, and she will change your future. After giving it a little thought, Evan nods. Why not? It's only a dream. The conductor furrows his brow and looks at Evan, making him shiver. This is no dream. Just make your choice and enter. From that point on, you will have no memory of your current past. You will have a new past and a new future. It's your break. For the first time tonight, Evan feels uneasy. He's not sure he likes the look on Mr. Sinclair's face. I think I should wake up now. He pinches himself. You are not dreaming, Evan.
As I have said, this is your chance to change your life. You can change whatever haunts you from your past. Everything can be erased. The conductor pulls a pocket watch from his vest and checks the time. But you must decide now. I have a tight schedule to keep, and the Empress has many stops to make this night. But how do I choose? Is there a way I can know what future each car holds? Evan asks. Choose, the conductor yells, making Evan jump. You must do it now. We have others to see. Evan hesitates and looks back toward the motel. His past runs through his mind, perhaps not his life flashing before his eyes, but his heart pounds as he remembers all the pain. Okay, I'll choose this one, Evan says and turns to the third rail car. The conductor turns toward him with a smile and does nothing to comfort Evan. A smile that's far too big. As you wish, he says. He lowers the step and waves his hand, gesturing for Evan to enter. Evan swallows hard and looks at the rail car. He feels cold as the conductor touches his shoulder. Go ahead. A new life awaits you. As Evan opens the door, a warm yellow glow shines from the opening, and he steps into his new life. Evan's head throbs and his vision blurs, momentarily disoriented. When his eyes focus, he is in a large, crowded room. He looks around, seeing a lot of people, but does not see the conductor. What the fuck? This is no rail car. 1,000 soft, glowing lights sparkle across the ceiling like stars as they reflect in what appears to be thousands of crystals in a huge chandelier that hangs at the center of the room. Evan notices the males are all dressed in dark suits, while the females are wearing black, silver, or red evening gowns. Oh shit, he says, suddenly remember he's wearing a sleeveless undershirt and PJ pants. Stepping backward, he bumps the door behind him. As panic sets in, he begins panting, and the room starts to spin. He squeezes his eyes shut and takes a couple deep breaths to calm himself. Reaching to open the door, he stops with his arm outstretched. What the? He looks down and realizes he's dressed in a dark blue suit and wearing pointed brown leather shoes. What in bloody hell? Evan says and chuckles. No more PJs? I beg your pardon, sir. Evan looks at a woman standing a few feet away and holding a tray of glasses full of amber liquid. Her smile fades as she stares at him. Are you all right? Sorry, yes. I was saying how I missed wearing a nice suit. Well, sir, I have to admit, it looks good on you, she says and winks. Thanks, he smiles and takes a glass from the tray. She turns and walks towards the center of the room, her hips swaying. She looks back over her shoulder and winks again before disappearing into the crowd. Evan then looks out through an enormous window and sees a full, bright moon reflecting off water below a cliff. Can I have your attention, please? Comes a voice from somewhere within the room, distracting Evan from his gaze. A man with graying hair, a gray, well-trimmed beard, and wearing round, framed glasses steps to the middle of the room. He is holding a glass of the amber liquid in one hand and what looks like a large plaque in the other. The crowd quiets, and Evan turns to listen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Gerard Black. I am the CEO of Black Horse Industries. Evan feels a twinge of recognition. This gathering is to recognize and reward one of our most valued employees. His program, called Chainmaster, is the most sought-after software in the manufacturing sector in North America. He pauses and looks around the room, enjoying the smiling gazes from everyone in the room. It uses a sophisticated inventory management system to streamline the tracking of both raw materials and finished products for our partner companies. By optimizing warehouse and distribution operations and providing real-time data analytics, management can make quick and informed business decisions. Mr. Black takes a sip of his drink and smiles. Unlike that well-rehearsed description, Chainmaster is easy to understand and use. The crowd laughs, all but Evan, who tries to remember where he has heard the name Black before. Seriously though, folks, Mr. Black continues, it is now implemented across 300 companies, with hundreds more interested in purchasing. Chainmaster is the largest software release we've ever had in our 20-year history. The room explodes into a loud, raucous cheer and clapping. The CEO waits a minute before raising his hands to quiet the crowd. This guy needs no introduction. It is my pleasure, no, it is my honor to present this award to Paul Lush. At the sound of the name, Evan gasps and reaches for the wall to steady himself. Two young, well-groomed, and handsome men step next to Mr. Black. Both men hug, and the taller of the two raises the hand of the other. Evan swoons, trying to catch his breath. Mr. Black steps up and shakes Paul's hand. Please accept this small token of our appreciation. The crowd whistles and cheers as Evan drops his glass. No one hears the shattering glass over the boisterous room. Paul and the taller man embrace again, this time kissing before separating. Again, his partner raises Paul's hand as the unrelenting crowd celebrates. "Oh, and by the way, there is a sizable bonus check on its way to you as well," says Mr. Black, smiling. Paul then hugs Mr. Black and kisses him on the cheek, to the delight of his peers. Seeing his ex is too much for Evan. His knees finally give out, and the room goes black. Evan opens his eyes and hears music and the muffled roar of people partying. As he rubs his eyes and sits up on a long, soft leather sofa, a sharp pain explodes in his head. He looks around the room, trying to get his bearings. Mr. Black, an unknown blonde woman, and the tall guy who raised Paul's hand all stand a few feet away. They are talking to one another and not paying attention to him. "Oh my God, Evan, are you all right?" Paul asks and kneels in front of him. He puts his hand on Evan's knee and squeezes. "Geez, honey, you scared the shit out of me." Looking at Paul with eyes like saucers, he tries to speak, but only moans. His last memory of Paul before tonight comes rushing back. Each of Paul's eyes had metal skewers protruding out of them. A steak knife was plunged into his mouth, so deep that the tip was jutting out of the back of his neck. Blood poured from a large gash across his throat. His crisp dress shirt was stained crimson as blood pooled around him on their bed. Blood. Lots of blood," Evan mumbles. "Evan, are you okay?" Paul asks. Evan continues to stare. "Dreaming," he says. "Am I dreaming?" His body trembles. "Some help here?" Paul yells. The others rush over and stand around them. "Jesus, Evan, you are so pale," the blonde says. "Lie down. I'll grab you some water." She rushes from the room and returns a moment later with a bottle of Perrier. "David, can you please get a blanket?" Paul asks. The taller man leaves the room. Evan mumbles something that neither of the others can hear. Then he giggles and speaks more clearly. "He was right." "Evan?" Paul asks. "Eugene was right." "What are you talking about? Who is Eugene?" Paul asks. He looks at Mr. Black. "Can you get help? Something is wrong." Mr. Black steps away and pulls his cell phone from his pocket. David returns with the blanket, but stands arm's reach away and holds it out. "What's your problem, David? He's just confused. Not fucking contagious," Paul shouts. David steps back further, still eyeing Evan. "Evan, talk to me," Paul pleads, laying the blanket across his legs. "What are you talking about?" "The conductor told me that my life would change tonight. All I had to do was make a choice. He was right. Now you're alive again." "Alive? Oh my God, Evan, what's wrong with you?" "I killed you. You cheated and I killed you." Paul gets to his feet and folds his arms, hugging himself. He wipes at his cheeks with his hand. Mr. Black steps next to Paul. "The paramedics are on their way. They'll be here in a couple of minutes. There was a knife, blood everywhere, but not anymore. It's changed." Evan giggles. "Not anymore. You're alive, Paul, and everything's going to be all right, Paul." "Someone help him, please," Paul sobs. Evan looks at him and smiles. "It's okay, Paulie. You are all right now. The Iron Empress took it back. Don't you see? No more blood." For a moment, Paul sees a familiar look in Evan's eyes. It's a look he remembers from a long time ago when they were in love. But the moment passes, then there's nothing but emptiness in those eyes. Then there's a knock on the door, and the blonde rushes to open it. 2 paramedics and a police officer enter the room. The female paramedic is carrying a black bag and kneels in front of Evan. She smiles and touches Evan on the shoulder. "My name is Brenda. What's yours?" The male paramedic readies a stretcher a few feet from the door as the police officer questions the blonde and Mr. Black. David stands behind Paul, who is still sobbing, and wraps his arms around him. Evan looks at the paramedic in front of him and smiles. "He was right. All I had to do was get on the train. Everything is going to be all right now." "Is he high or something?" David asks. Paul recoils from David's grasp and sneers at him. "You need to fucking leave. You are not helping." The paramedic returns the smile and says, "That's great, Evan. How about we get you on that stretcher and get you feeling better?" "I'm already better. The Empress has done it. She's changed everything." "Oh, Evan," Paul moans, recalling how it was before he and Evan broke up. Evan had been having hallucinations in their last weeks together. When Paul last saw him, Evan was in the psychiatric ward at the hospital. "I'm all right, Paulie. Can you take me home?" David whispers, "This guy is insane." "Shut up. Can't you see that he's sick?" Paul yells and pushes David away. "I told you to leave. Now get out." "Hey, John, some help here?" Brenda calls. The police officer stiffens instinctively and puts his hand on his holster. The other paramedic removes a needle from the bag and hands it to his partner. "Okay, Evan, this will help you feel better." She puts the needle in his arm and injects the fluid. As the relaxant takes effect, the paramedics get Evan up and onto the stretcher. They pull 3 safety straps across his body and buckle them in place. The straps are tight, partly for his safety and a little for theirs. Evan looks at Paul with a smile that makes Paul shudder. Led by the police officer, the paramedics push the stretcher from the room. As they make their way through the door, Evan gets up on his elbows and looks at the wall beside him. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair. Everything has changed just like you said it would." Paul looks at the wall where Evan is looking and cries out, "Oh my God!" The others look at him in shock. "What is wrong with you, Paul?" Mr. Black asks. "I just remembered something. Evan has a yellow and black stuffed animal, a bee, maybe? Anyway, he keeps it in a closet at his apartment, or at least he did when we were dating. He calls it Mr. Sinclair. He always talks to it, and he says it speaks to him." Everyone in the room shivers, and a train whistle blows a few miles away.
So we end the evening with a horror story. Thank you, Keith and Desiree. You did a great job reading the story. Thank you for coming this evening, and we hope you enjoyed the evening. Thank you to Bonnie, Olivia, Doug, Keith, and Desiree. Write Out Loud will be back on March 19th with author Angie Kunis, author of My List, My Rules. Thanks for coming.
I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the staff and volunteers of the Lyric Theatre, as well as the Write Out Loud Committee, for providing me with the opportunity to share some of my writing and participate in their recent event. My congratulations and thanks also extend to my fellow authors, Bonnie Allen, Olivia Clark, and Doug Cameron, for their contributions. It was a privilege to showcase the talent of writers from Swift Current, Saskatchewan. And thank you, listeners, for your support. This has been the Brewing Fiction Podcast. Cheers, everyone.